this is the beginning of the Assyrian downfall. There was a Median king called Cyaxares. Cyaxares is traditionally credited with changing the various Iranian tribes from city-states like ancient Greece with Athens and Sparta and all that into a unified state, Media. And when Media first appears on the scene, they begin troubling the Assyrians in ways that the Assyrians had not been troubled in a long time. And the Assyrians had set themselves up for this, because right around when Cyaxares is forming a unified state from a bunch of city-states that were giving Assyria trouble, the Assyrians finally decide to go do something they've been thinking about for a long time and attack Egypt. Sennacherib, we told you about him a minute ago, he was assassinated by his sons. Tradition says he had his brains bashed out from behind while praying, and the murder weapon were some religious icons, and the Babylonians considered this to be payback for Sennacherib destroying Babylon. Eventually, one of the sons, who was supposedly not involved in the assassination, a guy named Esarhaddon, takes over. And Esarhaddon does that thing that all the Assyrians have thought about recently but didn't do, and he attacks Egypt. And he takes Egypt. But now he gets Assyria bogged down. Assyria, being the first major empire, fell into every single one of the traps of empire. And the main one was overextension. And Egypt was the straw that broke the camel's back, because it was so far away from the major operations in the very, very old world's heartland that it kept the big Assyrian army tied down a lot of the time. And whenever they were over dealing with the rebellions that always happened in Egypt, people started rebelling close by to Assyria. And the terror policy was making more enemies than it was helping. And now these Medes had become a unified people. Well, in 615, it all comes to a head. In 615, the Medes move against the Assyrians. Now, to get an idea of how fast Assyria's fortunes changed, you can read the things that Ashurbanipal was writing early on in his reign, and they are confident and superior. He has the same sort of an attitude that all these Assyrians have. But by the end of his reign, he sounds like the world is falling on his head. Listen to what Ashurbanipal wrote near the end of his reign. I did well unto God and man, to dead and living. Why have sickness and misery befallen me? I cannot do away with the strife in my country, and the dissensions in my family. Disturbing scandals oppress me always. Illness of mind and flesh bow me down. With cries of woe I bring my days to an end. On the day of the city god, the day of the festival, I am wretched. Death is seizing hold upon me and bears me down. With lamentation and mourning I wail day and night. The situation has changed for the last great king of the Assyrians. And the records, the diplomatic and foreign policy records for Assyria end ominously in 640. And I had one professor suggest that the reason that they may have ended so suddenly may not have been due to any sort of cutoff, but because when Nineveh fell, maybe the records were cleansed of embarrassing information by the people that destroyed Nineveh. But when Ashurbanipal died, the normal problems of the succession arose, and his sons began fighting with each other for who got to be the king. This happened all the time in Assyrian history. And the army would often split itself and fight itself for the sons of the king. In the same way that the Imperial Roman army's most devastating enemy was another Imperial Roman army during the civil wars, the same thing happened in Assyria after Ashurbanipal died. And yet, this was not a time when Assyria could afford it. Because when one of those young princes finally defeated his brother, the army he had now was a weakened army. And he had major coalitions of enemies who hated their guts, ready to strike. The major one being this new coalition of people into a single unified people, the Medes. In 615, Cyaxares attacks Assyria. Now, he is thwarted in his attack, but a year later he comes back. And this time he manages to destroy the ancient religious center of Assyria and the old capital at Ashur. This is a bad sign, And it exposes something that no one in the very, very old world had quite been prepared for. And that's that Assyria was vulnerable to ultimate defeat. The Babylonians, who were always ready to attack Assyria, noticed how well the Medes were doing and started to freak out, thinking, okay, if Assyria's going to fall, we want pieces of it. We don't want the Medes to get all the credit and all the stuff. They joined up and allied with the Median army under the ruined walls of Ashur, it said. Cyaxares giving his daughter to the Babylonian king in the traditional cementing of an alliance. And after they ally, the final nail in the coffin of Assyria is when the group of people that they're expecting to save them from this predicament, the Scythian, barbarian horse archers, instead stab the Assyrian state in the back and join forces with Cyaxares and his Medes and the Babylonians, and they all move on Nineveh in 612. After several battles are fought in front of the walls, after a siege of 3 months, Nineveh falls to this coalition of allies. The Holocaust of the fall of Nineveh must have been the nightmare of all nightmares for the people who lived there. The Medes treated it the same way the Assyrians would have treated a Median city. Legend has it that the last Assyrian king gathered all of his precious stuff around him and set it on fire with him in the middle of it and burned himself to death as the allied armies were breaking down the walls of Nineveh. They destroyed the city to a point where modern archaeologists have gone there and found the ruins of the potteries and the glazed bricks and the other debris thrown in the moat to facilitate attacking the walls. They found the breaches in the walls. They have found the dead bodies with defensive stab wounds on the arms and the fatal stab wounds in the torsos all around the city. The evidence of fire and a heat so hot that glass might have melted. And the destruction was so complete and so unexpected that the people in that era must have been blinking like it was the light of a new day, like Sauron had been thrown down and now a new world beckoned, maybe human civilization 2.0. One thing's for sure. Nobody was crying for poor Assyria.